Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to our session 10 of our Manzuma al-Bayquniyyah class. Inshallah ta'ala, a quick recap from our last class. In the last class we covered two terminologies actually. We covered muttasil and musnad. And then we give a little bit of introduction and introductory points about what musalsal is, right? These three terminologies. Number one, we spoke about muttasil. Number two, we spoke about musnad, and we spoke about how they're different. Musnad is basically synonymous to marfu', meaning it goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. It's lazim for it to go back to the Prophet ﷺ to be called musnad. While muttasil, we said that muttasil is anything chain of which is connected, whether it goes to the Prophet, to the Sahabi, or to the Tabi'i. That's basically what Muslim muttasil is, and they have their own hukms. They could be Sahih, Hasan, or Da'if. Secondly, we started talking about musalsal, and this is what we're going to continue, inshallah ta'ala. This is where we left off, and we're going to continue from here. We said musalsal. One more time, I'll repeat it here. Musalsal is that hadith which is narrated with a continuous pattern. And then this is very, very popular in our time. You go to the scholars, great muhaddithun in our time. It could be Mufti al-Uthmani. You go to the Mashaykh in Mecca, Medina, right? And then you learn a hadith from them. You ask them about musalsalat. They will have a hadith of musalsalat, meaning they have narrated a hadith with a pattern that's continuous in every generation, every narrator. Every narrator followed that same pattern. Now that pattern we're talking about, the continuous pattern, it could be an action. Every narrator in the chain followed the same action. Or it could be a verbal statement that every narrator in the chain said the same thing. Or it could be a place that every narrator narrated the hadith in that place. It could be, for example, every narrator narrated the hadith in Medina. Okay? And then, or it could be the time that every person that narrated the hadith, he narrated it at that time, like the time of Eid. So again, the continuous pattern could be created through speech, it could be created through action, it could be created through maybe a specific quality of the narrator, right? Okay, and then, or it could be the time, or it could be the place. Got it? These are different scenarios here. Or it could even be the forms of ada, how we narrate it. For example, every narrator narrated it with sama'. Every narrator says sami'tu, 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 sami'tu. That's also one way of hadith became musalsal. Right now, I will, inshaAllah ta'ala, if you go into read Ibn Salah's Muqaddimah, you'll see that he has categorized musalsal into many categories. And if we speak about each and every one of them, it's going to take a lot of time. For example, he has categorized into musalsal bil qawl, there's musalsal bil fi'l, then there's musalsal bil qawli wal fi'li ma'an. Then there's musalsal bil qawl, okay, sifatan, okay. And then there is musalsal bil fi'l in terms of sifat, okay. And then there is musalsal bil bisigh al ada. Then there's musalsal bil zaman and musalsal bil makan. We spoke about this earlier briefly. And then Ibn Salah speaks about these different categories of musalsal here. So inshallah, now what I will do is to explain this better. Inshallah, I'll give a few examples from ḥadīth and musalsalat. Okay, there is one hadith I wanted to mention. One of the famous ones that every scholar narrates is the musalsal of Mu'adh bin Jabal radiyallahu anhu. Imam Tirmidhi narrates a hadith from Mu'adh bin Jabal radiyallahu anhu, and the Prophet said to him, he said, يا معاذ إني أحبك فقل دبر كل صلاة اللهم أعني على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. He said, O Mu'adh, indeed I love you. Okay, now every narrator, including Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, said إني أحبك, إني أحبك, إني أحبك to their students. So the Prophet said to Mu'adh, إني أحبك. Mu'adh radiallahu anhu said to his tabi'i, to his student, إني أحبك. His student said to his student, إني أحبك. His student said to his students, إني أحبك. Until all the way to us, our teachers say, إني أحبك. This is preserved with the continuous pattern of this word, okay? So this is called musalsal bil qawl, verbal musalsal, because we're saying إني أحبك. And then there is something else called musalsal bil fi'l, through actions. An example of this is, how do you have a physical musalsal? The Prophet ﷺ, when narrating a hadith, which is خَلَقَ اللَّهُ تُرْبَةَ يَوْمَ السَّبْتِ, he was narrating this hadith to the Sahabi, and then the Prophet ﷺ held the beard of the Sahaba, of Sahabi, right? And that's why it's called Musalsal بالشبكة, okay? بتشبيك اليد, where the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't hold the beard, he made shabaka, tashbik bil-yad, meaning they interlocked the fingers and the hands, okay? They made an interlock of the hands, okay? They locked their fingers together. Now that is called musalsal bil-shabaka here. Is this an action? Yes. And they're similar. There's musalsal bil-musafaha where the teacher says to the students musafaha, the student says, that student then does musafaha to his student when narrating the same hadith. And it goes on and on. There's also this musalsal bil-yad, which is basically hands, putting the hands on the hands, and so on and so forth. Okay? And then I'll narrate one more inshallah ta'ala, and with this here, is there is also something called musalsal bil-siyagh al-ada, where the narration that's narrated, every student, every narrator, every person that's narrating the hadith from Imam Bukhari all the way to the Prophet ﷺ says حدثنا 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 إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, or they say سمعت 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 النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, or they say أخبرنا 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 النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Got it? That's called مسلسل بالخبر or مسلسل بالسماع or مسلسل بالتحديث. طيب, this is another example, and this is what the author, when he says مثل أما والله أنبان الفتى, مثل أما والله أنبأ أنبأني الفتى, يعني the every person said أنبأ 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 أنبأ. Is that clear? That's what the author points at when he says أنبأني الفتى أنبأني الفتى. طيب, then we move on. There's also called مسلسل بالزمان, which is مسلسل with time. Time meaning, for example, there's a hadith Dailimi narrates from Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma. He says that I witnessed the Prophet ﷺ on the day of Eid. Okay, and he said, حدثني فلان في يوم عيد. Now, from that point onwards, every narrator that narrates this hadith, he would say, حدثني فلان في يوم العيد, حدثني فلان في يوم العيد. Every narrator narrated the hadith on the Eid. Same time, Eid, same day, same day. Eid. This is about time. Okay, and the last example is Musalsal bil Makan, which is Musalsal, continuous pattern created through the place where it was narrated. And this is, for example, Dailimi narrates from Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he says, I heard from the Prophet ﷺ saying that Multazam is a place where dua is accepted, and everyone that narrated this hadith. Okay, and then the Prophet ﷺ narrated the dua. He narrated the dua. He said, فَوَاللَّهِ مَا دَعَوْتُ فِيهِ قَطُّ مُنْذُ سَمِعْتُ هَذَا الْحَدِيثِ إِلَّا اسْتَجَابَ لِي. And now, every narrator, when they narrated this hadith, they were in multazam, and they said the exact same words. أنا ما دعوت الله فيه بشيء منذ سمعت إلا استجاب لي. Clear? This is called musalsal makan. Now, the question comes: what is the hukum musalsal? What is the hukum musalsal? Is it mutawatir? Is it sahih? Is it da'if? What is it? So, Imam al-Iraqi, Hafiz al-Iraqi has said that it is very rare that you will find musalsal narrations to be authentic. Okay? Free of weakness, meaning not authentic but free of weakness, the better way of saying. But not in the text. The text will be authentic, but in the description, how they're being described. For example, there has to be a point where that tasalsul cuts off, right? Where the teacher does not do musafaha with the student. There has to be one point. So again, he's saying that rarely you will find musalsal that's free of weakness. Okay? In the description, not in the text. The text might be authentic, but the description of saying that, oh, I did musafaha with my teacher did musafaha with his teacher, his teacher did musafaha with his teacher, going back all to the Prophet ﷺ, there has to be a inqita', breakage somewhere, breakage of tasalsul somewhere in the chain possible. Okay? So he says that the text may be authentic, but the pattern may be questionable or broken. Clear? And that happens in our time here. And there was a scholar I went to get ijazah from in Musalsalat. It was a very large crowd, hundreds, thousands of people in the big mosque. It was a grand mosque, and the sheikh, since it was so large, he couldn't do musafaha with everyone. He couldn't do Muslim musafaha with everyone, or do qabd bil lihya with everyone, or tashbih al yad with everyone. What he did was he appointed a scholar to become his wakil. He said, because he was a grand mufti there, so he said, okay, he's gonna go, he's gonna appoint someone as wakil, and he will do the musafaha and all these tasalsul for him. It's wakil, wakala, right? So now, some students did it, some students didn't do it. Now those students that didn't do it, and they narrate musalsal to their students, their tasalsul is broken. This is one example of broken, for your better understanding, inshaAllah ta'ala here. So Imam Suyuti also says, he says, قَلَّ مَا يَسْلَمُ فِي تَسَلْسُلٍ مِّنْ خَلَلٍ وَرُبَّمَا لَمْ يَصِلِ, right? يصل. So he says that rarely musalsal is free from defects. Sometimes it doesn't remain continuous at all. It doesn't remain connected at all. And Ibn Hajar also said that one of the strongest musalsal narrations is a musalsal bis-saf. Okay, now since we understood the hukum of it, that it's rare to find musalsal that's free of weakness in the description, but the text might be authentic. What is the benefit of musalsal then? If it could be weak or broken, that's the question right here. The answer to this is the benefit of musalsal. It shows the exceptional precision of our scholars, that the precision of hadith narrators, that every single one of them precisely documented this. Okay, this is the fa'idah of it, benefit of it. Second, it shows how narrators emulated the Prophet ﷺ in everything, their actions and their words and their mannerisms and etc. If Prophet ﷺ narrated hadith standing up, now every narrator is narrating the hadith standing up. Isn't that manner? Isn't that emulation of the Prophet ﷺ? Second benefit of Muslim. And thirdly, we learn it's very valuable for studying narrator reliability and patterns of transmission, and then of course, and what was the pedagogy of early scholars. It shows us that. طيب, this is about musalsal, and please keep this in mind, inshaAllah ta'ala. Now let's move on, inshallah, briefly. Let's jump on to next classification. This was additional points here. Now we're going to jump on to the next classification, which is classification of hadith in terms of number of chains. How many number of narrators are there in each generation? Okay, so again, we spoke about different divisions. We spoke about a division which is related to weakness and strength of the hadith. We spoke about division of hadith, categorization of hadith when it came to who it is attributed to, the Prophet, the Sahabi, or the Tabi'i, right? Now we're going to speak about the division of hadith, categorization of hadith, with regards to the number of narrators in the chain. Okay, how many narrators are there in every generation? طيب, now we're going to quickly read it, inshallah, and then we're going to jump onto the sharh of it. Quickly, bismillah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى: عزيز مروي اثنين أو ثلاثة، مشهور مروي فوق ما ثلاثة.
حسبك here. Now what the author says, again, the author doesn't have the tartib here, right? If he's mentioning about Āzīz and Mashhūr, he should mention about Gharīb as well. He's not mentioned this, he's going to mention later. Okay? So he speaks about Āzīz. He says, Āzīz is that type of hadith. Marwi اثنين أو ثلاثة. Āzīz is that type of tradition, or that type of report or narration, which is narrated by marwi, narrated اثنين, by two people, أو ثلاثة, or three people. And then he says مشهور فوق ما ثلاثة, marwi فوق ما ثلاثة. And mashhur, and he says mashhur is that narration, that report, that hadith, which is narrated by three or more. Now I want you guys to know this here. This is a division of hadith with regards to number of narrators in a chain, okay? Now understand this here. According to the scholars of Musalsal Hadith, the terminologies of hadith, they say that there are two categories of this division. Two primary categories of this division. Number one is called Mutawātir. Al-Mutawātir. Mutawatir is that hadith which is narrated by a large group of people, large number of people in every generation. Large, عدد كثرة العدد, عدد كثير, large number of people in every generation. To an extent, تحيل العادة تواطؤ على الكذب, that it's impossible for them to agree upon a lie. It's impossible that this many people can come together, right, and they lie. It's impossible. Okay? تحيل العادة تواطؤ على الكذب. Hundreds and thousands of people narrating, could you call all of them liars? It's not possible. Okay? Because it's impossible that everyone is going to be liar. Hundreds and thousands of people, millions of people actually, right? تحيل العادة تواطؤ على الكذب. So again, mutawatir is that type of narration which is narrated by a large group of people. Number two, in every generation there is a large group of people. Number three, it's impossible to call them a liar. It's impossible for them to agree upon a lie. Number three, and number four you can add is that fourth condition for mutawatir is that one of the senses have to be used for narration. Meaning they have to say sami'tu, or it could be similar to I heard the Prophet ﷺ, or it could be I was informed about the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? So one of the senses are being used here. This is what mutawatir is. And one of the biggest examples of mutawatir is Quran. Millions of people, if not millions, I mean, we can't say billions, but hundreds and thousands of people, from Sahabas to millions of people now become muhaffaz yearly basis. Hundreds and thousands of people become muhaffaz, hafiz al-Quran on yearly basis. Could you call this a lie? No, you cannot. All these people cannot agree upon a lie. Hence, mutawatir is that type of hadith. If this is basically mutawatir is this is the definition of mutawatir. So what do you think? Is it sahih, hasan or da'if? We say that it doesn't even come under that. Mutawatir will always be authentic, and hence we don't categorize mutawatir into hasan, sahih, da'if, and etc. Okay, so mutawatir is like the prime category which does not have any categorization. طيب, clear? Now the second category, second prime categorization of number of the hadith that has number of chains is called āḥād. āḥād. So mutawatir, number one, mutawatir, and number two is āḥād. Now what is āḥād? This is where I think we spoke about earlier as well. Āḥād is that hadith which does not meet the criteria of mutawatir. Meaning there's not large number of people, it's not very large, it's not every generation. It's not every generation. Maybe for example, let's say there's 50 people in one generation, and then there's like 2 people in the next generation. In mutawatir, every generation, 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, every generation there has to be a large number of people. Āḥād might not meet that condition criteria, hence it will be āḥād. Okay, that's āḥād's definition. Now there are subcategories now of āḥād. No categories for mutawatir. āḥād has categories, and that's what the author mentions here. First category of āḥād is called Gharīb. Okay. Second category of āḥād is called ʿAzīz, which the author clearly mentions here. And third category of āḥād is Mashhūr, which also the author mentions here explicitly in Bayquniyyah. And then fourth one, we don't have to add here, but 3 categories here, 3 main categories. Number 1 is called ʿAzīz. Number 1 ʿAzīz, Gharīb. Number 2 ʿAzīz, and number 3 Mashhūr. Now ʿAzīz and Mashhūr are mentioned here, right? We just read the ibara. Gharīb is coming later, hence we're going to put them all together because it's related to our discussion here. طيب. Now let's go over each and every one of them inshaAllah ta'ala. Briefly inshaAllah, I'm going to mention number 1, Gharīb. What is Gharīb? Gharīb is that type of narration. We're going to go over 1, 2, or 3 inshaAllah ta'ala. We're going to stop at let's say inshaAllah ta'ala Mashhūr. Let's define Gharīb quickly. What is Gharīb? It's not mentioned here. So Gharīb is a narration, a hadith, which is transmitted by a single narrator. Only one narrator in one of the generations. Okay? A hadith that's narrated by one single narrator at any point of the chain, okay, It could be in the entire text or the chain or in a portion of the either. This is what basically Gharīb is. So again, one more time I'm going to say it. What is Gharīb? Gharīb is when it's a hadith that's narrated by only one narrator. Okay? Now, one narrator is found in the first generation, second generation, third generation, it doesn't matter. For example, let's say, I'm going to give an example here. The hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ is Gharīb. It doesn't mean it's weak. It doesn't mean it's weak. But إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ is Gharīb. It's Sahih Gharīb though, okay? How is it Gharīb? Umar radiallahu anhu was the only Sahabi that narrated it. From Umar radiallahu anhu comes Alqamah and Ibrahim, and then after him, there's one more narrator, and then Yahya bin Sa'id al-Ansari is also a single narrator. So for 4 generations straight, only one person was kept on narrating this hadith. Only one person, no one else. Then from Yahya bin Sa'id al-Ansari radiallahu anhu, rahmatullahi alayhi, and onwards from Yahya bin Sa'id, many students. The hadith spread to many students, thousands of people, thousands of narrators. So again, it will be like this: Umar, and then we have Alqamah, then Ibrahim, and then Hamad, and then we have, let's say, Yahya bin Sa'id al-Ansari radiallahu anhu, and then from him it divides. If I'm not mistaken, one of the names, if I'm not mistaken, inshallah, then it divides into many students. So now, would we call this Mashhūr because there's two or more narrators in the Yahya bin Sa'id al-Ansari? No. Even if one generation has one narrator, it's called Gharīb. Simple. Now I want you to understand this. If one of the narration has one narrator, it's called Gharīb. That means, let's say, if all the generations have more than 3 narrators, okay, but one generation has 2 narrators, what would it be then? We say that it will be ʿAzīz. ʿAzīz. Now, what's the definition of ʿAzīz here? ʿAzīz is that type of hadith. Is that hadith? Okay? Is that hadith which is narrated by 2 narrators, at least one generation. So that means, for example, let's say if there's a hadith, if there are 2 Sahabi that narrated the hadith, and then from 2 Sahaba, in every generation there are tens of people narrating the hadith. 5, 6, 7, 8, second generation 5 people, third generation 5 people, fourth generation 5 people, all the way to Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi. What do you call this? Do you call it Mashhūr? We say no. We call this ʿAzīz. Why? Even if one generation has 2 narrators in it, we call that ʿAzīz. Now let's say if it's one narrator, only one Sahabi narrated it, then they has 2 students, 2, then 3, 4, 5. Do we call this Gharīb or Āzīz? We say Gharīb because one narrator is there. We go with the lowest. We check what's the lowest, what generation has the least amount of narrators. If it has 1, always be Gharīb. If its least amount of narrators is 2, always is Āzīz. Now if the least amount of narrators are 3, then that's where Mashhūr comes. Mashhūr means minimum, bare minimum, the narrators are 3, at minimum. So every generation had 3 or more narrators, and that will be Mashhūr. Does that make sense, inshallah? So again, this is briefly, I just mentioned to you guys, inshallah, this is Āzīz, Gharīb, and Mashhūr, and these are categories of Āḥād, and Mutawātir and Āḥād are categorization of hadith with regards to how many number of people or narrators are there in the chain. Mutawātir, hundreds and thousands of people, impossible to call it a lie. Āḥād, it could be 1, 2, 3 or more. Okay, so now that we have discussed all the definitions of Gharīb, Āzīz, and Mashhūr, now let us get into the details of it, meaning in terms of what is the hukum of Āzīz, Gharīb, and what are the types and examples of it. So I'll mention examples here. Just to explain Gharīb a little more, as we said that Gharīb is that hadith that at least one generation has one narrator. The other generations can have more than 2 or 3 or 4, but at least one generation has one narrator in it, okay, in the chain. Now, what can happen is that the gharaba Gharaba can occur in three ways, okay? Number one, it could occur across the entire chain. The entire chain is Gharīb. Only one, every generation, only one narrator is narrating it. Like, for example, Umar radiallahu anhu, first four generations was Gharīb. طيب, it's not the entire chain, but first four generations for إنما الأعمال بالنيات. Gharaba can occur only in the text, meaning the chain might not be Gharīb. Chain might not be Gharīb. However, the text, for example, let's say Imam Malik adds min al-Muslimin, while all the other scholars and narrators, they never add min al-Muslimin to the text. Now that also makes it Gharīb. And number three, it could be in a specific part of the sanad, which is a beginning part of the sanad for إنما الأعمال بالنيات, Umar radiallahu anhu, all the way to Yahya bin Sulaiman, Yahya bin Sa'id al-Ansari radiallahu rahmatullahi alayhi. Lastly, Gharaba can also occur by adding something which other narrators have not added. Now, how is this? Meaning one narrator adding something which other narrators didn't add. This also makes it Gharīb. So again, Gharīb is not limited to just a chain that one narrator is narrating the chain. It could be in every generation. It could be in one generation the narrator is one, right? Or it could be in all generations the narrator is one. Or it could be that one narrator is adding a specific word or like min al-Muslimin, while others narrators didn't. It could be in the text as well. Gharaba could be in the text, right? For example, Imam Malik adds min al-Muslimin to a hadith, while all the other narrators, they never add anything. They narrate the same manner, right? Or it could be, as we said, it could be ziyada that could be added, which is not added by anyone else. We spoke about this earlier. So this is called infirad al-rawi. Now, there are some scholars which always narrate the hadith alone, like Imam al-Zuhri, Qatada, and the other scholars. But they are reliable. Because of their reliability, we accept their narrations. Got it? Now, as we said, there are two types of Gharīb. Number one, entirely Gharīb. Number two, partially Gharīb. Like إنما الأعمال بالنيات. Four narrators, first part of the generation is what? Gharīb. But the next part, no. Okay? Now, let me give you an example of Gharīb occurring in sanad and also matan. Okay? There's an example of Gharīb about there's a prohibition that's given to selling a gift. You got a gift, selling it, there's a prohibition to it. There's a hadith. Now this hadith is only narrated by Abdullah bin Dinar from Ibn Umar. No one else narrated from Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. Only Abdullah bin Dinar has narrated from Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. Okay? Then there is a hadith. There is a hadith about zakat al-fitr. The Prophet said, "Farada Rasulullah sallallahu zakat al-fitr." The Prophet obligated zakat al-fitr. Now all the narrators, all the tabi'un and sahaba, they narrated the exact same words. But Imam Malik, he adds min al-Muslimin. This is called Gharīb fil matan. Gharaba is in the matan. The one narrator alone narrated min al-Muslimin, while no one else added min al-Muslimin. They all said farada Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam zakat al-fitr, while Imam Malik said farada Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam zakat al-fitr min al-Muslimin. See how Gharaba occurs? That's Gharaba there. Alright, so now these are different ways Gharaba can happen. Now what is the what is the hukum of Gharīb? Number one, Gharīb doesn't have a specific ruling. It could be Sahih if all the narrators are reliable. It could be Hasan if all the narrators are reliable. And it could be Da'if if one narrator is weak but the rest are what? Good, right? Could be all three. However, many scholars, they warn against seeking Gharāib or studying Gharāib. Okay, let me mention a few statements here. Imam Abu Hanifa says, "Man talabaha kudhiba." Yani, man talab al-Gharāib, whoever seeks the knowledge of Gharāib and he studies Gharāib, he will be rejected. Kudhiba, denied. Imam Ahmed said, and we will suffice with this one inshallah, he says, لا تكتبوا هذه الأحاديث الغرائب فإنها مناكير وعامتها من عن الضعفاء. He says, don't write these hadith غرائب. Don't write them. Don't document them. Majority of them are munkar hadith, and most of their narrators are du'afa. Majority of them are narrated from weak narrators. So don't document them. Don't study them. Okay? And there are many other aqwal, like Imam Malik says, شر العلم الغريب, the worst of knowledge and science is Gharīb, and the best of knowledge is what the people have narrated. And then and many other statements of scholars. So what we learned is that majority of Gharāib, we find they are weak, and we should avoid studying Gharāib. We could learn Gharāib to avoid falling into using those hadith, inshallah. That for that matter, for that purpose, we could learn. But in terms of practice and using it as hujjah, we should avoid it. Number two, ʿAzīz. As we said, ʿAzīz is about minimum one generation has two narrators at least, while other generations can have more. Right? It can have more narrators. Now, example of this, inshallah, I'll mention here is again, Imam Bayqūniyyah mentions ʿAzīz marwi اثنين أو ثلاثة, 2 or 3, right? But the preferred opinion is that 2. ʿAzīz is narrated by 2 people in one of the generations minimum. 3 not needed. Okay, 3 is for Mashhūr. 3 or more are for Mashhūr. So example of this is the hadith لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من والده وولده والناس أجمعين. This hadith over here is from Anas radiallahu anhu, Qatada, Abdul Aziz bin Suhaib. Only Qatada, Abdul Aziz bin Suhaib narrated alone. Only 2 narrators in this generation. Next, from Shu'bah, Sa'id and Qatada. Only 2 narrators from this generation here. Okay, so again, this is an example here. Only 2 narrators in one generation, while other generations can have way more. That's an ʿAzīz, inshallah. Hukum of ʿAzīz, very similar. It could be sahih, it could be hasan, or it could be da'if. Very simple. Now let's come to Mashhūr here. We define Mashhūr. We said minimum 3 narrators in one of the generations. Minimum. Okay? If it's less than 3, that means it's going to fall under ʿAzīz or Gharīb. If it's 3, yes, Mashhūr. And what about the maximum? So Hafidh bin Hajar said 3 to 10. Beyond 10, will come under the ḥudūd al-Mutawatir. ḥudūd al-Mutawatir starts from 10. Some other scholars have defined different ways, they have put different limits, but Hafidh bin Hajar, the mu'tamad is Hafidh bin Hajar's, inshallah, which is that 3 to 10 is Mashhūr. طيب? And then the hukum of Mashhūr is exactly the same. It could be hasan, it could be sahih, it could be da'if. Now, one important note before, inshallah, we conclude here is that Mashhūr, there is a Mashhūr istilahi which is defined by Muhaddithun, as we did right now. Mashhūr, that's narrated by 3 to 10 people, correct, in one of the generations. Then there's Mashhūr Lughawi, not the technical but linguistic Mashhūr, which means famous, right? There are hadith which are famously narrated. Like there are hadith that are famously narrated. Like Innama a'malu binniyat, is it famous? Yes. But is it actually Mashhūr? It's not Mashhūr istilahi. We could call it Mashhūr Lughawi because it's always on the tongue of everyone. So Mashhūr Lughawi is something else. Mashhūr Lughawi could be sahih, hasan or da'if. Right? Mashhūr Lughawi, like the hadith that circulate among us, it could be sahih, hasan, da'if. So again, one thing we must know is that Mashhūr could be salahi or Lughawi. We're not talking about Mashhūr Lughawi here, which means famous. We're talking about Mashhūr Salahi, the technical Mashhūr, which is narrated by 3 to 10 narrators. This is basically that. And another synonymous, another name for Mashhūr is Mustafil, which is always used side by side. Inshallah, we'll leave it for some other day, inshallah ta'ala. And we'll conclude with this. Barakallahu feekum. Inshallah, we'll see you in the next session. In the next session, in the section 11, inshallah, we'll discuss all the different categories of weak hadith, da'if hadith. And barakallahu feekum wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.